Yeah, from Nobby?
Couple of months ago down in Welsh Wells. Bought a van load of tin carrots, changed the labels to Australian pears.
Go lovely with a drop of cream, boy.
Welcome back, folks. Sorry it's been a while since the last video. I've had a lot going on elsewhere. Add it up to here, as the governor might say. But now it's time to get stuck back in with some good old 70s nostalgia. We begin this trip in the shadow of Hammersmith Bridge, where in the episode Poppy, Vic Lavit's Mrs. Sally is on her way to see his associate Rob, closely followed by Carter and Stan, who've been staking out Lavit's gaff to see where she runs following a squad visit. Here we see Carter and Stan leaving the bridge. As you can see, it was a lovely day to be by the river when I filmed, and similarly low tide. I have to say, old Father Thames looks a lot less murky these days. I couldn't get a high vantage to film the bridge from above. I suspect the sequence was filmed from the window of a nearby building. Speaking of which, next to exactly those buildings in Trojan Bus, Colin Ray hand over the paintings stolen from Giesler to their buyer, Goldman. Here we see Goldman hop down from the Thames wall onto the Lower Mall and meet the Aussie boys as they pull up at the end of Digby Mansions, the buildings from where I suspect the shots in Poppy were taken. The eagle-eyed detectives amongst you will notice that I filmed this on a different day. I didn't get the right shots in June and had to pop back in November. As you can see, the view today hasn't changed very much at all. One difference you can see though, the old steps accessing the river have been removed and the gap in the wall has been filled in here.
Smooth as silk. That's poetry. That's poetry.
Is that it?
Yeah, or £200,000 worth of it. Take good care of it.
Digby Mansions, which we see in the background here, is a set of ornate Victorian apartments built in the late 1890s, following the demolition of the former Digby House, and soon after the new suspension bridge was built in 1887.
You meet a nice set of people in this business.
Yep. Well, I think we've done a good morning's work, right?
The close-in shots here show how little has changed between then and now, as you'd expect with such buildings. Behind Goldman's head, we can see that it looks like the bridge was a darker colour back in the day.
If only we could do a 40-hour week.
Specialisation. That's the name of the game. Hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Finally, the lads trot off up the Lower Mall, and as we do the same, you can see that the view here hasn't changed too much at all either. Right, let's leave the tranquil history banks of the Thames for a bit and nip up to the equally ornate splendour of the A4 Great West Road, where in Ardmen, Regan and Davy Freeth are in heated conversation as the car barrels away from Hammersmith.
There was no difference between me and those animals because we spoke the same tongue.
As you'll see, it's hard to piece together these quick-cut close-up shots, but we start at the foot of Hammersmith flyover. Davy is in the offside rear seat, so the shots over his shoulder show the buildings on the A4's northern side. These distinctive roofs and chimneys here on the generously named Riverside Gardens are the ones I immediately recognised that helped me place the shot. As Jack is in the passenger seat, the view over his shoulder is to the south side of the road, and in this case looking at the end of Furnival Gardens, where again a distinctive looking house tags our location for us. Now I must admit, when I planned to film the A4 I thought, well, this one's going to be a struggle to make interesting. Maybe we'll just have to talk about something else, such as other things we remember from the 70s maybe, like Look In, Rock and Rollers, Swap Shop, Spangles, Top Deck. See, there is a Sweeney angle here. Love to hear of any other places or products where you remember the show appearing. Rolling on west, the discussion continues as we approach Welter Road.
And you know exactly what those two maniacs were after when they came down here. You've known from the beginning, why didn't you tell me?
Here we're on the south side of the road, looking at the wall that was in the background behind Jack. You can see that this house coming up has had a bit of work done. Lovely veranda to watch the traffic from. And here, these houses on Welter Road still look much the same, but as we so often see, matured trees now dominate the view. Just a bit further on, Davy ain't holding back on his opinions.
Isn't that the usual attitude for the Met? Patronising in the extreme. All the wogs start south of Calais and civilization stops north of Watford. And the next bastard that calls me Jock gets his head knocked off.
Meanwhile, on this same stretch of road, back in Series 1's Jackpot, the squad discuss a suspect.
Yeah, I remember Charlie. In the old Lawsy days. He was mining for the money and all around about that time. He got a bit careless and lost all their money. They said, Charlie, you've been at the bunts again?
So, a key landmark in this section is this BP garage that we can just see behind Davy's shoulder. We'll roll the episode back a touch here as we pan round. This house on the left has a distinctive tuning fork-shaped external chimney that you can clearly see in the episode shot. And now, we're looking back at the northern half of Welter Road and inbound towards the flyover. From the other side of the BP, we can see the very distinctive brown clockwork building, which is in the background here behind Freeth. This was designed by renowned architect Richard Seifert, whose firm also designed buildings such as the NatWest Tower and Centre Point. Notice that we can date the clockwork building quite nicely. It's there in Season 4, but back in Season 1, the building behind the BP was an office of the International Time Recording Company, a progenitor to what we now know today as IBM. Meanwhile, on Regan's side of the road there's also a BP garage. This one is currently in the midst of demolition and rebuilding. Beyond the petrol station is the Grade 2 listed former Metropolitan Water Company pumping station, now named Bazalgette Court. We can see it here just in front of Regan. And here it is again with Carter passing by in Season 1. Right, let's recover by the river for a bit at the Upper Mall, where in Hit and Run, Regan meets Fladge the Brass for some info following Alison Carter's death.
Fladge?
Who'd I talk to? George Carter?
No, one of the other lads. Carter's off for a week.
Ah, was his wife then?
Yep.
The view we see today is practically identical, including the little lookout type structure next to the slipway opposite a boathouse of the London Corinthian Sailing Club. Regan and Fladge stroll upriver a little way in the direction of Chiswick, beneath where some flats are built over the top of the Thames path.
For you?
Ah,
Mickey Parisian, name?
by repute, no.
Hey, been muscling him around Notting Hill, Bayswater. Striped the girl last week.
Tom,
Young Irish kid.
it doesn't increase her earning potential, does it?
Shove your head in a bag, that was his advice.
What's the kid's name?
Deirdre Quinn.
Will she talk?
Be your age.
Back in the very early days of this millennium, I used to work in an office on Hogarth Roundabout and would wander down here at lunchtime to eat me sandwiches and get away for a bit. Standing here back then is the first time I consciously remember thinking, I recognise that, a Sweeney film there, and wondering what other places I might be able to identify. So in many ways, this location can be considered the birthplace of my channel. I'll expect the heritage plaque anytime soon. Here, we're looking upriver towards Chiswick Eye on the right.
Next item.
Our Sunbury friend.
He's an active little number, isn't he?
Islington next week.
When?
Dunno.
It's always struck me that these two major arteries, the Thames and the A4, run so close together here, but are in many ways such worlds apart. Well, enough messing about by the river, time to return to the A4, where Mr. Regan wants to know.
What is a chukta?
It's a Highland expression for a punter.
We've moved west, and behind Freeth you can see St Peter's Church. This Grade 2 listed building was built in 1829. When the Great West Road was built in 1957, St Peter's lost a significant amount of its land, including graves which had to be relocated. On Regan's side of the road, we see the houses of Verbena Gardens, all of which still seem to be intact today. Now if you're like me, you'll have spotted something here. Regan asks his question by Verbena Gardens, and Freeth answers him by St Peter's Church, all whilst the car was travelling in this direction. Do what? Meanwhile, on the eastbound carriageway in Jackpot, George is giving a history lesson.
My man, you Charlie. In fact, they used to run together. He said if he had followed Quigley's advice, he'd be a millionaire by now. They started a bookie sometime before the war. Now, that was the only year I can recall...
Coming up here, we whiz past another of those tuning fork chimneys. And then we pass St Peter's in the background with its distinctive arch windows. And here we are on a sunny day in June, 50 years later. By the way, if you're wondering whether walking up and down the A4 filming edges gets you funny looks from the traffic, I can confirm that it does. Oh, and just for good measure, later in this conversation we pass Verbena Gardens south again, heading in totally the opposite direction. Confused yet? No, I am. I suspect the production just drove up and down the A4 till they had the shots they needed here, and never dreamed an anorak like me would be dissecting them half a century later. Enough! Let's move north to St Peter's Square, and the bigger they are. The squad are keeping tabs on Harold Collins, who is blackmailing tycoon Leonard Gold over his part in past military atrocities.
Oh, look at the state of that. Schwarzer. Never you mind the colour, just feel the width. Yeah.
The car was parked on the east of the leafy St Peter's Square. Unsurprisingly, the square and the expensive properties that surround it are still all here. Now unfortunately for Collins, the flying squad ain't his only problem. Gold has his men after him too. This closer zoom shot looking south has a similarly unaltered view. Mostly the only difference is a bit of render and white paint on the buildings. Here's a different angle from the eastern side of the square by the houses. It's noticeable that the episode filmed in the autumn or winter. Everything's grown much bigger and greener in my shots. Just round the west side of the square is a scene from Arts and Mines, where the home of one Professor Busby is being burgled. Police cars converge outside the house with the burglary in progress, just as his wife is arriving home in a black cab. Though the episode filmed at night, you can easily see that the properties still look the same. Particularly obvious is the pineapple gatepost cap outside number 35. The police were called to Busby's house because a vigilant neighbour on British Grove spotted the burglary in progress. That's where we head now. This overhead shows the view from British Grove Flats to the house on St Peter's Square. Number 34 is where the burglars were climbing in through a window. These mansions are all seriously rigged up with security cameras and whatnot. Didn't fancy filming those and risking a pull. This is a front view of the flats on British Grove. Today they look much the same. The one from the episode is highlighted here. As the burglars try to escape over a back wall, the police are waiting to move in. One of the coppers takes a right hit. Meanwhile, one of the firm has gone lame, and his so-called mates don't want to leave anyone who might blab. We'll finish up with the view south down British Grove, where the copper and the burglar were both left for dead. So, here in purple you can see the area covered so far, including all my gadding back and forth up the A4. Tune in next time for part 2. Cheers!